Hello and welcome to the podcast. We are once again joined by Connor. How are you doing, Connor?
Good, Christopher. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And in today's podcast, we'll be discussing the recent snowstorm that struck Texas at the weekend. So, just for anyone who's not too familiar with it, the National Weather Service released an update that 73% of America had basically been covered in snow. Temperatures reached a low of minus 18 degrees in Texas on Sunday. And in turn, this left millions of people without clean drinking water and without electricity. 13 million people were actually asked to boil their water. And it was really horrific. I mean, Connor, we've seen the scenes over the weekend of, families kind of huddled around and trying to heat themselves up. And you even mentioned yourself regarding the fact that families were now using their cars as means to heat themselves up. Would you like to add anything into that, Connor?
Well, they were put under a boil water notice, so they had to try and boil water so that it was clean. But the problem was they had no water because all the pipes had either been destroyed or completely frozen. Yeah, people had turned on their cars and slept in their cars to try and stay warm. But the carbon monoxide poisoning, and several people have died through that. There's been people having to burn furniture and taking up their garden fence just to light a fire to stay somewhat warm.
As a result of all this, I mean, if we look at the actual figures themselves, 4.3 million Texans left without electricity. As I said, 4 millions without clean drinking water, and it's really brutal. Now, at this moment, anyone who has a logical way of thinking would believe that, Ted Cruz, the senator for Texas, would be available at this time. He would be supporting his constituents, but actually he took this prime opportunity to really decide to go to Cancún in Mexico. He did not take the moment at all to help anybody in his state. He didn't take any responsibility for what had happened in Texas. Took the sharp opportunity to alleviate the fact that he had quite a large degree of responsibility as the Texan senator. What do you feel about that, Connor?
Yeah, it's really terrible of him. In 2018, he won his re-election bid against a guy called Beto O'Rourke, who was a congressman at the time. And the difference between the two during the storm was drastic difference between the two. So Ted Cruz went on holiday to Cancun, and Beto O'Rourke was going door to door and helping seniors in the state try and stay warm and get food. He opened up a call center so the seniors could call in and request aid. And Ted Cruz comes back from Cancun and he blames his daughters for the trip.
Yeah, and just on that, he said that he just wanted to be a good dad. He just wanted to be a good dad by bringing his daughters to Cancun while his constituents froze under the sub-zero temperatures. He said this was a last-minute decision anyway, but later in the week, messages did indicate that, in fact, that was not the case, that Ted Cruz's wife was in contact with her neighbours and they had actually planned this out a few days in advance.
And what's funny about blaming his daughters is his daughters are 10 and 12. And what he said originally was that he planned on bringing them to Cancun and then coming straight back home, which I think he's implying that he was going to leave them there.
I mean, it does not make any sense. I mean, fly off to Cancun for a day and then come straight back.
He tried to make the case that he was going to come straight home immediately, but then people noticed the fact that he brought a suitcase. I don't usually bring a suitcase if I'm going on a one-day trip.
That wasn't the only statement that he made. So he said that he wanted to return because it didn't feel right, and that he had second guesses, and that he understood why he has a responsibility. I don't know what to make of that, to be 100% honest. I mean, yes, of course you have a responsibility. I think you should have understood that from the moment you were elected as official by the Texan people. Secondly, yes, it wasn't right. You flew off while your constituents were freezing. Thirdly, second guesses. I mean, you should have had them second guesses while you were actually thinking about going on a holiday instead of just flying off, then coming straight back.
Yeah, and he said that he started to regret it as soon as he sat down in the plane, which was funnily enough around the same time that he would have saw phones taking pictures of him. Quite funny that.
He went on to state his main goal was fixing this problem and making sure it doesn't happen again. To my knowledge, currently he still hasn't done anything.
Well, that's not true. He handed out water bottles.
Oh yeah, okay, well,
single bottles of water to people. And he posted pictures of it the day after, trying to make amends, but I don't really think it worked too well. His approval ratings have dropped since, obviously. But he wasn't even the only statewide official in Texas to leave. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, he took a trip to Utah for a political like convention, almost like a meeting. And it just goes to show the difference between even the two parties. The minute there's two Republicans skipping out in the state, and then there was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a representative from New York, who raised $5 million for the people of Texas.
Ted Cruz walking around handing out single bottles of water and then using it as a way to get some media attention to make him look good isn't obviously a very good thing to do. I mean, that's probably the least he could do for his own constituents.
But I've also seen some good come from this. There was a plumber from New Jersey who drove all the way down to Texas and has been fixing pipes for free, trying to help people of Texas in any little way he can. I thought that was a nice story that kind of cheered me up after seeing the horror of what actually happened.
Yeah, and seeing that Ted Cruz decided to take himself off to Cancún for a day. So while they were at Cancún, at the beach, the media decided to, and I just want to laugh at this kind of as well. The media decided to spy on. I mean, this is terrible as well. I mean, I condemn it as the fullest extent because obviously you shouldn't be spying on anyone. They were spying on Heidi Cruz on her bikini on the beach, ready to have a nice sunny day.
Yeah,
definitely not great.
Heidi Cruz, she makes a lot more money than Ted Cruz, which is why I assume he threw his daughters under the bus, not his wife.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny to see that Ted Cruz is actually more willing to throw his own family under the bus than he is to throw Donald Trump under the bus for anything. He's more loyal to Donald Trump than he is to his own family. It's crazy. Even after Donald Trump mocked his wife and called her ugly. Heidi Cruz, that's Ted Cruz's wife, she seems to have been really the instigator of the trip. Text messages show that she was the one asking to go to Cancun. She invited her neighbors, her friends. These text messages were actually released willingly by someone who was in the group chat. He was a friend of Ted Cruz. And I think maybe that was because he tried to throw his daughters under the bus and he said that he wasn't going to have that. And he tried to maybe get back at Ted Cruz for that. It's a very messy situation. Many people on the right wing seem to be suggesting that, the message is being released. They weren't done out of goodness. They were done, in a vindictive way to get back at Ted Cruz. I'm not 100% sure exactly what the intentions were in terms of actually releasing the messages to the media. So I can't really comment on that too much. But it seems as though the executive branch have actually responded, in my opinion at least, better than Ted Cruz responded. So Biden actually approved a disaster declaration for Texas. So just briefly to explain what a disaster declaration actually entails, it is federal funding being allocated to individuals across a state. In the case of a disaster, obviously, it was obviously enacted in this case in Texas. This goes towards assisting residents in temporarily repairing their homes and providing them with loans to properly buy food and buy essentials. Federal funding available to individuals across the state. I think that was a very good move on behalf of the executive branch. And I think definitely it would have helped a lot of people out because we even seen in the footage that homeowners were actually attempting to prevent their pipes from bursting by using their own blankets in their house to wrap the pipes.
I think the Biden administration's handled it quite well. They have a group of the administration that deals with emergency declarations, and they went down to Texas with bringing heaters, blankets, and water and generators to try and get power back up and running because people like sleeping in churches trying to stay warm, and I think the heaters would definitely help people staying in the house.
I think this was also the first big test. Well, I mean, there's currently a pandemic, so I don't know how true this is, of Biden's pledge to govern on behalf of the Americans, and he has definitely done that. I mean, he said that he wouldn't divide the states through blue and red. I mean, if Donald Trump was still in Biden's position as president, I think if it were a blue state, how willing would Donald Trump be to help?
I don't think at all, really. I remember there was the California wildfires during the Trump administration, and he wasn't very great at responding to them. His suggestion was to rake the forests. Don't ask. And yeah, that seemed to be his big idea for trying to do that. But I think, the Biden administration have they jump straight in. I think they'll be trying to pass a bill in the Congress to try and assist the people of Texas, and I think that should hopefully pass.
Ben had a very good discussion with Governor Abbott and stated in this discussion that the federal government would work in close conjunction with local and state authorities to offer relief to those affected. And I think that is just a very good decision on behalf of the executive branch. And I think that they have definitely handled it much better than the local, well, not local authorities, but I suppose better than Senator Ted Cruz, who is just god-awful as a senator, in my opinion.
Greg Abbott, the governor, he's another character in this who's been really, really poor at his job. He blamed solar and wind power for the power cuts, but they only make up 21% of the Texas energy production, whereas gas, which is the largest thing that creates Texas energy, is at 40% of that. So I think it's really, really just kind of, they're trying to score political points in advocating for coal and gas energy rather than renewable energy during this, which is it's very, very poor to see.
I'm actually going to touch on that a bit after as well, but I'd just like to say before that it really is hilarious to see over the many tragedies that have occurred over the last couple of months during, well, when Donald Trump was leaving office for the 6th of January, and now this event. The media, particularly the left-wing, or right-wing media, Fox News, seem to be constantly just on Biden, well, not on Biden's back, but they seem to constantly just be criticizing the smallest things, just scoring political points and being very hypocritical, in my opinion, because they were the exact people who were trying to defend Trump through a lot of the different things that happened during his presidency. And now they're the exact people attacking the Biden administration for actually trying to prevent any more turmoil.
Yeah, well, I think it's just pointless to expect Fox News to change as the presidents change. I think they're just into to try and spin anything into a conservative talking point. They've been doing it since the 90s. The guy who set up Fox News, Roger Ailes, was an executive advisor to Richard Nixon. He was set up part of the Murdoch empire now, Fox News. So I don't see it changing anytime soon from its conservative messaging.
Most definitely not. It just really does highlight the false narrative being spun by the right-wing media. Just on what you were saying before regarding energy, critics of renewable energy took obviously this opportunity as a prime opportunity to blame the failure of wind turbines for the power shortages. Fox News, Tucker Carlson, stated, "The windmills failed like the silly fashion accessories they are, and people in Texas died." My response to Tucker Carlson would really be, according to EA.gov, 3 billion kilowatts per hour of energy was produced by renewable energy sources in 2019. And also in 2019, wind turbines in the United States were the source of about 7.3% of the total US utility-scale electricity generation. Now, it's undeniable that some wind turbines did freeze, but they're not the fault for the power shortages. As you would imagine, when something is in motion, it is less likely to freeze as it exerts more energy. According to the BBC, the freezings in the non-renewable energy industry have a much larger impact on the generation of power. So if we compare both the statistics between the renewable energy and the non-renewable energy industries, we can see that 30 gigawatts were taken offline from gas, coal and nuclear sources, and almost half of that, I guess, just slightly above half, 16 gigawatts loss in capacity in wind and other renewable energy supplies. So that really does highlight that, in fact, renewable energy sources were not to blame for the loss in power.
Yeah, and Texas is quite unique. It's the only state on the continental United States that is not connected to the federal energy grid. So there's the eastern and the western energy grid of the United States, and then there's the Texas energy grid. And it's run by a private company called ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And their board is controlled by the state legislature and the state executive branch. And even they have said that renewable energy is actually providing more energy than expected during this crisis. And this actually isn't the first time that... So about 10 years ago, Texas had a similar problem. And then they were advised to winterize their systems to produce energy. And they didn't do that. And that is because the Texas energy grid is completely unregulated in any situation for anything. So it's not immune to heat waves or as we see now, winter storms. And I think it does highlight and underline the importance of regulating and monitoring the economies and the markets of every sector.
I would have to disagree with you on the every sector front there, Connor. I do not feel like the monitoring of every sector is necessary. I believe that we should monitor sectors that are directly involved in this current event. It really does depend on the degree of monitoring that's going to be occurring and the degree of, if it did come to it, the degree of, for say, government subsidy cuts on these industries.
Well, I think that we can agree that the energy grid and the energy market is something that definitely should be regulated given the importance of it. And I'll give you an example. Is El Paso is a city on the west of Texas. It's one of the only parts of the state that isn't connected to the Texas energy grid. And it was one of the only parts of the state that had power while the rest of the state didn't.
I would 100% agree with you on the fact that we should be monitoring certain energy industries. I do not agree with the notion that we need to monitor all industries because of this.
Well, that is fair. For opinion, but I do think that this can happen in any market, even if it is not to the level of this.
Well, just to get some professional opinions on, renewable energy and what role it actually played in the power cuts in Texas, Dr. Joshua Rhodes from the University of Texas at Austin tweeted the following: "There is no single resource to blame for this. We usually think of peak events happening over a couple of hours. This one is a lasting day. Wind has been below expected output, but so have other sources." Then we turn to Professor Benjamin K. Savicle from the University of Sussex, who stated that the wind energy industry has almost 5 decades of experience designing wind turbines to operate in freezing temperatures and harsh climates. I think that ties back into winterizing renewable energy. And I actually was watching a podcast. It was on the David Packman show, and he was talking about the fact that non-renewable energy industry have actually been offered this on many occasions, but they have declined it. They have declined the opportunity to winterize their equipment, and in turn, this has definitely had an impact on how much power was lost.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the point that Conservatives are trying to score political points during this crisis, where even their own constituents are dying in their houses, and the fact that they are trying to blame renewable energy in a state that has a government that strongly opposes renewable energy, because there is no reasonable explanation to attack it. And I think even if there was a discussion to be had about it, it should be had after the crisis has been averted.
I've watched so many different right-wing media sources, and they seem to be more interested in talking about how Ted Cruz was done wrong. He shouldn't have been criticised for being on holiday, so on. They're very, I don't know what
one conservative commentator tweeted that Ted Cruz should actually be applauded for going to Cancún, because it means he wasn't taking up power and water that could go on to other citizens.
Actually, that just reminds me of something. Ted Cruz actually was harsh enough to leave his own dog in his house while he took himself off to Cancun. I find that really harsh.
Yeah, he left the dog in the freezing cold for a week. It was planned to be a week, unless a neighbour was going to call in or something, but...
It really is just another one of the many examples that we've been given over the past many years of how just terrible of a senator Ted Cruz is.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the there was a hurricane in New Jersey several years ago, and Congress tried to pass a relief package for New Jersey, and Ted Cruz voted against it, whereas now he's begging for tech aid to Texas.
Ted Cruz, he's also a hardline, Trump supporter. He's been up to a lot over the last couple of months, and I really do feel bad for the constituencies that he's representing, because he's done a very, very poor job. And yeah, taking himself over to Cancun definitely was not another good mark on his political resume. He's very bad at politics as well. I mean, I was actually watching a few right-wing media shows, and these are the rare few, and they were discussing the fact that, I mean, it was a really bad political move. I mean, just put all the party politics aside for a second. In itself, as a politician, it is a very silly move to do something like that. Anybody who's been in the game of politics for long enough can tell you that you need to be careful around them things, because ultimately he will suffer at the ballot box, and so will his party.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Completely agree with that. And this is a guy who's aiming for a 2024 presidential run, and at this rate, he won't even win the Republican nomination. I
mean, he just committed, in my opinion, another act of political suicide, along with the January 6th, the failure to condemn I suppose he did condemn it, but he didn't condemn it in the sense that he voted not to convict Donald Trump of the riots on January 6th. So
just closing up, I just want to wish well the people of Texas and hope that they get through well and safe.
Yeah, I'd like to do the same as well. It is a very sad moment for people living in Texas, and I hope that you are able to properly navigate your ways through this harsh moment. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the podcast, and I will see you next week.